Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Good evening, everybody. All right, great. I decided to go first because I feel like I'm the host. Welcome, Satyan, the San Luis Obispo, where life is always good. And the weather's a little bit different than in Williamstown, I think, right? Especially right now, I understand. And I'm really honored to be speaking here. I found it very awkward when I first saw the poster. And it said, Pete Schwartz, this atheist, is gonna, and I've never identified myself as an atheist, so that was like some new shoes to try on. I meditate, and I recognize like a lot of value and truth in the things that the Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi and Jesus Christ said, but then I'm an atheist, I guess. I remember when I came home from grad school one day and was talking to my mom. And I mentioned in the conversation, that I don't consider myself a Catholic anymore. And she just stopped. So my mom was having none of that. She said, I'm a Catholic. Your dad's a Catholic. We're all Catholics. You're Catholic. Right? It had nothing to do with whatever I had to say. I said, but Mom, I think the Pope's full of doom. And she said, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean you're not Catholic. Right? So for her, it was about community. So in any case, I expressed this to Jared, who is putting this on so wonderfully. And he said, oh no, we can change the name, right? It doesn't have to be, it can be atheist or monotheist or whatever. I said, well, no, I don't recognize a higher power, so atheist, it's appropriate, right? And it's easy, it's marketable, the atheist versus the Christian. Right? It's simple. It's like that cage fighting or something. And I have a lot of friends come up to me and they say, Pete, you're going to lose. And I'm like, lose? I thought we were going to talk. And so, in this and in the whole process, I had to ask myself, losing or winning, what are my objectives? And I want to be real honest with myself, but I don't want to change anyone's beliefs, and I don't want to weigh a faith versus another. It's not really interesting to me. To me, it's not about what you believe that I find interesting, but what you do. Your faith is internal, it's kind of intrinsic, but it's what's outside of you, how you treat each other, that makes a change that affects other people. And so I guess this could go to what do I believe, So what you see before me in my imagination, right, my perspective is a little bag of strongly interacting organic molecules, right, that have processes that repeat themselves and are reasonably sustainable for, on the order of 100 years. And they're strongly interacting, meaning if the processes of one of them changes a whole bunch, it's going to affect the other. In particular, if a bunch of tissue, ceases to function, everything goes. But these actions and these habituations that make up, who I am, you are all very similar, but a little bit different, which you identify as maybe a personality. But these patterns that we have, these processes, they can be shared with other people. And you see that, right? You see that when you hang around with someone a whole bunch, you pick up their mannerisms, right? And we can affect, so the processes between two different people, right? The molecules in one person are less strongly interacting with the molecules of another, but it's not zero. But you can affect someone else's process, you can touch them. Right? I could say something, and you had this happen to you. I could say something awful to Satyan that really, you can feel the ripple of molecular processes in your body all the way to your toes. And I could say to Satyan, you know, I know you have 4 kids, and the welfare of your children is really important to me. How could I help if there's a problem? And you know that those processes are being shared with someone else. And so, in this way, we can extend outside our bodies, in both in space and in time. And so, like for instance, the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, or the essence of Mahatma Gandhi, might have been the processes, his molecular process, or Martin Luther King's dream. You know, this lives, and Martin Luther King, and everyone else, though their bodies may change, those processes extend outside of them and continue. And so, by accepting this, that we share processes, I would call that a closed system, that we're inside a closed system. You accept that as your community. As opposed to an open system where you recognize an us and a them. And the them can be people, but it can also be, for instance, your environment. That you can recognize an environment around you, or people, as resources that you can use to help your processes. And they're external to you. But our systems, I think, are opening up. And it's happening right now very fast due to 2 things. 1, communication. And 2, the rate at which the population is growing and we're using resources. So the communication, we know what's going on elsewhere in the world. They are harder and harder, people far away, to be another, to be different. So for instance, in a closed system where you'd say, well, we're going to extract some resources from Malaysia. You know, and there was some conflict, so we had the military deal with it. Well, if there were people dead, I could see them moments later on the internet. And I can look at them, and I can recognize that they're people like me. With the environment, we have this closed system model where I can extract some resources and use them, and then there's some waste product. But we're getting to a point where that action will come back to us. And so, right now, I feel as though we as humanity are moving from a recognition of closed system from open system more and more to a closed system, that the earth and we as people are community. And we recognize that, that the actions that we do can come back to us. And it can be in the form of environment, but it can be social. If a group of people are upset enough with us, they might drop a 747 into one of our buildings. And that's going to cause a lot of different changes for us. And so I wrote down here, I wrote YOLO. I remember reading that on YouTube. So YOLO, you only live once. And I think, although I'm not sure, I think if you Google that, you could find many videos of people doing horrendous things, naked and drunk, because you only live once, so you have to do it, right? And so I say, YOLO, you only have this one little chance to create the processes and share them and spread them, that we might find a way to live forever on some level. And so my angle here with faith is, so we've got this planet. How do you want to be with it? What do you want to share? What do you want to talk about? What conversation would you like to bring up? What processes would you like to support? This is with the environment. You know, how do you care about the environment? How do we want to be with each other? I just recognized that Oxfam very recently published that the 85 richest people on the planet, how many people read this? 85 richest people on the planet have as much wealth as the poorer 1/2 of the planet. That's 3.5 billion people. Now, I did the calculation for you. That's 1 to 40 million. Is this what we want? Is this how we want to share our resources? That's just an example. And so, What interests me is how we want to interact with each other and how we want to set boundaries or how we want to recognize commonality. Because I think we have many thousands of years history of contrasting ourselves with other people and finding differences and weighing and seeing who might be better. And I want to ask, how has that worked for us? I think it's made a lot of walls. Maybe I don't want to answer that question. We can just ask, how would that work for us? And how might we want to make it differently? And I want to invite you to look at your actions and ask yourself, like, how do I want to be? What do I want to support? That didn't come out with it. And so I go back to what my mama said, that for my mama, it wasn't about what I believed. It was if we were in the community together, right? That for me, saying I wasn't Catholic was rejecting the family, and that we as a community should stick together. But humanity can be our community. And so this would extend to all people and also the environment. And then you might say, well, but our faith informs our actions, right? And that's important. But does it? Does it always? Right? I know that, for instance, in international development, I've worked with, actually there's 2 Christian groups that I'm really fond of working with, Seeds of Hope and Life Water. And you know, at first when I met them and I recognized that this faith is really important to them, I was worried. And then we sit down and we talk and we recognize that we have all of the same interests in mind. We want to help people the same way, and working together is really, really wonderful. And so, you know, I remember when I was a kid, we would sing the song, "We know we are Christians by our," they will know we are Christians by our love. And I asked myself, well, is that true? Right? Like, how about if you're close to a community that is a different faith? Is their love any different? I mean, this is a human quality. It's not a Christian quality. And so I know that people of faith often identify their community by their values. And then we have like Christian values. That's really important. That's what holds us together. But I'd step back and say, you know, are those Christian values, are those human values? I mean, they existed before Christ recognized them and demonstrated them. And I think he did a really super good job. But you know, inside I could say any other faith, the community, they share their love and they share values. And so, I guess what I want to say is we have a lot of things in common as human beings, and I'd like to invite faith communities to open up their world to human communities. And as I end this, I'd like you just to consider, this is our planet, we share it. How do you want to be? Thank you very much.
I thought I was going to be underdressed, wearing jeans, beating up. Cool. Well, my friends, I just want to say thank you for the invitation. I'm here for the year at Stanford, and it was just an awesome drive just to come down here to Cal Poly, hang out with you guys. Thanks so much for people I got to meet over dinner today, and just we had a lovely time talking, being gracious to me. You know, I just want to start by saying that the great thing about being in college, more than any other time in your life, not when you're going to be working, not when you're in elementary school, not when you're going to be married with 7 kids, is now is the time you have the freedom to struggle with big questions. You can ask these kind of questions, and you're surrounded by people who are like you, who can think about these things with you. You know, the questions are, or what's the meaning of life? You know, is there a God? What is goodness? What is truth? And why are infinity scarves so popular? Isn't it just a scarf with the ends tied? I don't know. Anyway, well, today we're here to talk about big ideas, you know, God, science, altruism, what it means to be good, what it means to sacrifice yourself for the good of the community, for the good of humanity. But then you have this question which I ask myself, you know, is goodness relative? Does it sort of depend on what it means? So here's a question for you guys. Here's a little, you know, a case study. Say you want to invite a bunch of friends over to your house and you want to show them The Little Mermaid. All right? Now the question is that a good thing? Is that a good thing? For many of you, you'd say, absolutely, it's a great movie. I would love to show my friends The Little Mermaid. I think this movie is pure evil. And let me just explain to you from my perspective, all right? Here's what I think of as a dad of a daughter. So here's this dad who absolutely loves a baby girl, gives her everything she wants. She's a princess in the ocean. All the friends she could ever play with down there, all the gifts. He only says, hey, baby girl, just one thing. Just stay away from the humans. We just don't know them that well. And what does she say? Screw you, Dad. First thing she does, runs over, meets a guy and says, he's the one. How long does she see it? 4 seconds. She's willing to give up her gift, her identity, her princesshood, her voice for the sake of this guy. I don't know. Not cool with this. So here's another question. Let's pretend you're your friends over and talk about this equation, the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. One of the most beautiful things there is. Here it says, add up the curvature at every point on your manifold. It's going to be 2 pi times the Euler characteristic. No matter how you stretch the object and how it changes, globally and locally, they're constrained by one another. So here's the question. Is this a good thing to have your friends over to your house to talk about the Gauss-Bonnet theorem? Absolutely, I say. But some of you agree with Stephen Colbert when he says equations are the devil's sentences. So is that goodness? I mean, what does it mean to do good to mankind? You see, for thousands of years, the notions of truth and goodness have been linked to the notion of God. Well, today in the 21st century America, this is certainly not true. Reality is no longer measured in a need for God or church or holy days. That's not the point. See, there's a belief that religion is no longer relevant. It's only a scaffolding. It's just there to hold things together until we really figure it out, until science comes and explains it. And part of this talks about God, science, and altruism. Here's what Michio Kaku, a famous physicist, writes, summarizing the work of Arthur C. Clarke. He says, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from divinity. Basically, eventually, whatever your God is will be replaced by science, will be replaced by our understanding. Now, due to the Enlightenment mindset, science has become the new measurement of real and good. Science is the new God. Let me just step back just for a second and explain how this happened. During the Renaissance era, art and math and music and literature, faith and reason and beauty all existed together in a package. You know, you had paintings and poems and cathedrals and inventions. Around 1750, the Enlightenment era came about, and it asked this question. Science and reason must be advocated as the primary source of authority. Look, you just can't say the sun is in the middle of the solar system. You have to prove it. You have to test it, measure it, evaluate it. You just can't say, I believe. Now, don't get me wrong. I love the Enlightenment era. Right? It's given us amazing changes, amazing technology, better medicine, better food, better ice cream, better transportation. It's a good thing. But in the 21st century, I think we've taken it to the extreme level. Here's what Bertrand Russell writes, famous philosopher and mathematician. He writes, whatever knowledge is attainable must be attained by scientific methods. And what science cannot discover, mankind cannot know. We're putting all our chips in the science bucket. But my friends, I think people, including myself, are thirsty for things more than science and reason. You know, we love music. We love mysticism. The world is raptured by Oprah and Deepak Chopra, theater, tailgating. We're thirsty for relationships, for friendships, for something spiritual, something beautiful, something bigger than who we are. We see this everywhere we look. Every ad is not about science, it's about Victoria's Secrets. That's what makes you want to look at the TV. It's not Gauss Bonnet. Biology and chem and math isn't enough to explain it all away. Enlightenment is being asked to handle things it wasn't meant to handle. It's like a dough perfectly made for a pizza, now being asked to stretch to fill the table. It's just not designed for it. You see, we need a model today that takes science, brings it in, but can also handle the mess of this world. Let me explain to you what I mean by the mess. Here's something that's messy, that I love, ice cream. This is Grader's ice cream. You find this in Columbus, Ohio. The chocolate chips are so soft, filled with fat, they melt in your mouth. Unbelievable. This is black raspberry chip. See, for me, ice cream is more than somehow chemistry and nutrients and the pieces of the puzzle that are going on there. It's an experience, it's beyond this. Here's something else that's messy that I love. Women. Relationships, dating, love, marriage, sex. Dude, it's all messy and glorious. There's something about this thing that you can't break it down and understand scientifically. Here's something else messy that I love. This is my family, right? Thank you. But as you'll notice, if you're an observant viewer of this slide, you'll notice that first of all, my wife is an Indian. Problem number one. Her biggest recommendation, advice that she would tell to people who are interested in marriage is marry within your race. So now you understand. Why? Because marriage is hard. When you put two people together in a different race, it's really tough to make out and figure out how life works. You're arguing about Crest and Colgate. You're arguing about everything possible as marriage would strain you to do. But not only that, hard. Then you have those two things on the right and this one on the left, right? Those three kids, right? Their life is going to be messy. They have like these two people as their parents. And then if you think that's tough, you have this little one. And if you can't see her, here's this other picture of her. Blonde-haired, blue-eyed little thing that we adopted, right? Foster child. We had her since the day she was born. She's 2.5. She is the angel, the love of my life. And her life completely messed up. Why? Because she has me as a dad. Can you imagine? Blonde-haired, blue-eyed, girl in my family? Where is the identity here? But my friends, let me tell you, in this entire mess, it is absolute joy and glory. And it is all put together in this package. I need something that makes sense of all of it together. I'm a scientist. I don't just want to understand things in physics and math. I want to understand how everything works. All the mess. You see, I want a theory. I want a theory. It doesn't have to be a scientific theory. I just want a theory of life, theory of everything that makes sense of beauty and its mess. And to me, unlike anything else I've ever studied and looked at seriously, the Christian faith makes that theory work. And here's why. Built into the heart of God himself in the Christian faith is a God filled with mess. That's what he's called Emmanuel, God with us in our mess, in our junk, in our joy, in our pain. And to me, this is a bold theory of everything. Here's the most attractive thing to me about the Christian faith, is that it's not a psychological faith, it's not a moral faith, a metaphysical faith, a philosophical faith. It is a faith that's grounded in history. It makes bold historical claims. It talks about the nation of Israel and how God hung out with them. It talks about the life and the death and the supposed resurrection of Jesus, this guy who lived 2,000 years ago. And it makes bold claims. You shoot those claims down, you shoot the faith down. That's what it says. That's the way God interacts. To me, I'm convinced those claims are true. Those historical, measurable claims. Now, you can't measure history using science, but you can measure history using historical tools. And to me, that's a beautiful thing. You can actually test this belief. Now, I talked about God and science. Let me just close by talking about this last piece of the puzzle, altruism and good. In my struggles, my personal life, I am convinced that showing goodness to others is centered around two things. This is, to me, the biggest thing whenever I think of showing goodness and kindness to somebody else. It's centered around, for me, justice and forgiveness. And here's what I mean by those big words. Justice means you want to ask for things to be set right. You just want things to work out the way you want. Forgiveness is you want to give up that right and you're willing to let it go. So here's what happened. Today I drove down from Stanford down here to Cal Poly. A red Dodge cut me off in the middle of my drive. I said, brother, I forgive you. I have a right, because you did something, you offended me, and I have a right over you, but I let that right go. But let me tell you something. If somebody hurts my daughter, my baby girl, if somebody abuses her, it will not be easy to let that right go. I will want justice to happen to this person. Now, why is altruism linked to justice? Why is goodness to others linked to it? Here's what N.T. Wright writes. He's a brilliant theologian, and he's using the work of Miroslav Volf. He says, there must be exclusion before there can be embrace. Evil must be identified, named, and dealt with before there can be reconciliation. In order to show love to another person, give up my life and sacrifice my life to another person, we must show what it means to be just. Evil must be understood. You know, we all have this in our heart, my friends. We long for justice. You see this in every movie you see in the world today. Talk about The Godfather. Talk about 12 Years a Slave. Talk about The Incredibles. One of my favorite movies ever. Matrix. Do you remember that scene? This is probably my favorite scene in all of moviedom. Neo walks to the metal detector. The metal detector goes off. The guy says, "Excuse me, sir. Could you empty your pocket to loose change?" Tears when I was in the theater, just crying. Why? Because redemption is coming from Morpheus. Justice is going to be set. Neo's going to set the world right through these actions. You're excited for this. You want justice in your hearts. For me to talk about loving another person, I need justice also. Now, how do we go about this? You know, the Eastern perspective says, dude, just accept it. There's the good and the bad, the Jedi and the Sith, the yin and the yang. You're going to have all this stuff. Like, just accept it. You have this. The Western perspective says, escape it. You know, do the best you can in this world, and then you die and you leave this broken world. To me, I can't handle both. I'm not just willing to accept this stuff. The world is too beautiful. I don't want to escape it either. Now, neither of these address justice. Let me just say this. The Christian faith, to me, considers the entire story of mankind through the problem of evil, since the very beginning to the very end. And the goal of it is to deal with evil and to destroy it. And the death of Jesus on this cross, this man 2,000 years ago, is the climax of this defeat of evil. And at the heart of the Christian faith is this one truth, which is amazing. To me, there's a God who died willingly for the sake of his enemies, who prayed for their forgiveness. And we're called to imitate this God, to show true altruism. And the resurrection of Jesus, not as a spirit, but as somebody who resurrected in body and flesh, shows that this world, this body, flesh, blood world matters. Ice cream matters. Justice matters. Earth matters. What we do and how we take care of this planet matters. And our beautiful world will one day be set right. So let me just close with this last quote, one of my favorite movies, Princess Bride. It says, life is pain. Anyone that says different is selling something. You see, we're here to wrestle with big questions. There's no easy box to check. It's going to hurt when you think about the mess of this world. But I encourage you guys, don't be afraid to get messy. Don't be.
Thank you. Well, talk about the big ideas. Quite enlightening. Thank you, all of you. So for the next few minutes, we're going to just discuss some of these ideas, and I must admit I was sort of surprised that there are very similar themes amongst the things that you were talking about, with perhaps a different setting for them. So maybe we can explore the setting, at the same time talking about the themes seem very similar. And one of the things that caught my attention was you talked, Dr. Schwartz, about human values and how love and...
Can't hear you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Such big ideas, and it was really nice to hear people really elucidating what is underneath a lot of the things that we believe and we feel. So much of what we feel, I would say, is what comes across to me. So Dr. Schwartz was talking about human values, the idea of love. And I think that Dr. Devadoss, you actually extended that to also talk a little bit about justice and how you set the world right. So I guess one of the questions I have for you, Dr. Schwartz, is...
You call me Pete.
You you want me to cut it?
You do all the time.
I do.
Like right in our office is like,
So, I was wondering if you could talk about how you see the setting of right of that thing in the world that seems so wrong at times, how people can go and offend each other and do all those things. How do you see things being set right?
I think the key lies in, well, I mean it's tough because right for one person isn't necessarily right for another. So you have all these different views and priorities and self-interests. And I think that the key lies in seeing the other person as yourself, you know, as an extension or very similar to yourself. And I know that, and I feel like I'm a little kid just learning this when I have, you know, a conflict with someone. I mean, it was always very simple before. They were just an asshole, right? Maybe I shouldn't have used that word. But now, like you've never heard that word. But now it's like, well, wait, they're a human just like me. And so how is it that they're seeing me? And where does this conflict arise? And so that to me is a very good first step, is accepting conflict. That, you know, we'll have conflict, we must have a different perspective on something. I want to see how the other person sees it.
Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's really hard for me is sort of the difference between atrocities done, right? So I've been very protected in my life, and maybe you have, you know, we're in the Western culture, right? So I haven't had my mother killed in front of my eyes, or, you know, things that are going on in the world today that you could turn on the TV and see. So to me, you know, I can sort of imagine what the worst thing that's happened, which is not that much. But for real pain, there's this, knowing that, having this belief that there's a God that's shown himself in history, I can rely on the fact that he will handle it. So I guess the question I would say, or ask you is, how can you handle it intense pain? Like if something happens to your children, you know, somebody has offended them, like is there a release valve or a process you work through? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do know. I had the opportunity to have a very acrimonious divorce, and so I know, you know, it'll take me a little while to remember, but I really know, you know, and when I get that confusion about what to do because there's pain or conflict, I try to step outside of myself and say, what is it I'd like to see myself doing? And it really makes things easier because there can always be an answer, right? I mean, like, why couldn't that person just be reasonable? I don't control that, but I can control, like, how do I want to be in the face of this? And so that's my, how about yourself?
Yeah, I guess it hasn't, my life has been quite protected in terms of some serious pain happening to me. But I have, you know, I know friends who have shared painful things that have happened in their lives. And I think to me it's, if somebody gets away with things, that's the hardest, right? If there's an injustice done that still lingers, like he got away with, or even the amazing statistic you read about the top 85 people. I'm just thinking about what, in some sense, they're getting away with, right? Because they are standing on the backs of, in some sense, slavery, right? The other half of the world. So what makes my heart feel at peace is that there's a God whose heart burns hotter than mine. That there's a God who sees that and he will handle it. Or else I don't know how I would be, you know, if I didn't have that peace to go back to.
So for that, I mean, to me that's a great conflict as an example.
Yeah.
You know, you said that these people are standing on the backs of other people, and that should be right. Like we should redistribute the wealth or land redistribution, I think.
Yeah.
Now, there's other perspectives, and it's not my perspective, but they're all valid, is well, you know, we have this free society, and they wrote this. And then for you to go in is to be stealing from them. You know, I often think, or turn that around, if someone steals something from you, let's say, right, you can feel injustice, and then I can shrug my shoulders and say, well, in the context of a capitalist society, really, I mean, what does it all mean?
Yeah, yeah. Look, can I just keep pushing a little bit?
Absolutely.
So I had this question which is related to very much what you're saying, which is, you were talking about not what we believe, but what we do, right? That's, which I really love. And so, to me, when you said there are all these perspectives that maybe a capitalistic businessman would say, I've worked really hard to do this thing. I've played my cards right. I take intense risks to do what I am. How can you try to reallocate my wealth, right? When that person can do, or take that risk with their family's future. And that's a fair thing to say. But to me, I guess my struggle is that I think there is something called absolute truth. Right? In other words, we do have our perspectives, and we should be careful to say that, no, I have the perspective, right? But on the other hand, we will all agree that gravity is there. In other words, we can have a perspective as to what's happening when I drop the bottle, but maybe gnomes, invisible gnomes, are pulling it down, right? That's a perspective, right? And nothing can be disproven, or we know they're not gnomes at that time, right? So, but probabilistically, that's the only way we will publish these.
Like, don't tell me.
But probabilistically, you know, we've experimented this kind of times. We think there's actually a force, a gravitational force that does this thing. And quantum mechanics is one of the most beautiful and accurate systems we have. So there's this truth that I'm actually willing to sort of bet my life on when I get on an airplane. You know, when I do these things, there is physics that works. And so, is there such a truth for things other than science? You know, is there such a truth for what is good and what is right? And I'm not saying that we can't have different perspectives, but beyond that, is there something that you think is the truth in other realms that might not be scientifically measurable?
I don't know.
But does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think about a conversation that we had was, you said, you know, well, how do you know if it's good that you show this movie, right? Yeah. And I have my own issues with A Princess, the role models that, you know, I don't know if that's what I want my daughter to see. I know how happy I was the day she said, hey, Dad, you know, I just want to tell you, I'm so old with princesses. They're spoiled brats, and they always get their way, and they never do any work. Yeah.
So did she clean up her room then? Did she clean up her room?
No, come on. The theory, I like it. And the delineating things in terms of good versus bad that we see in every Disney movie, right? And I sit down and I say, you know, Harry Potter, right? That's great books, but you start looking through the world through that lens, and it's really hard to say, I have a conflict with that person. I'm sure they have a valid perspective. You know, I want to see it that way too.
But wouldn't you say if like a baby is napalm, you know, some horrendous thing that we could almost all agree that that's wrong, no matter which perspective you take, that is, or you think that almost any action that happens could have a redeeming perspective. Do you know?
Oh, gee. I mean, you see, I don't know that I want to judge that. I'd say that I would do what I could to stop something like that, right? And yes, of course I would find it horrific.
Yeah.
At the same time, where did this come? Oh, right, our conversation. Right, I never got back to it, I'm sorry. You said what's good and bad, and I said, you know, it's so hard. But you can recognize what's altruistic, I thought. And then you know, I kind of defined altruism is when you're doing something that you think will help the other person. You know, so I mean, I don't know if that's any answer to your question. That's good.
You guys done?
I guess we're done.
It was, I guess you mentioned the altruism and can you define it just briefly for us? The word altruism, either one of you.
I guess actions with benevolent intent, like the altruism. How did I do that?
Yeah, I don't know. I thought it was something exactly. I thought it was somehow giving up yourself in that stage, sort of self-sacrifice and giving yourself up for the benefit of others.
So it turns out that there's a big sign up in the UU out there that says, learn by doing good. And we should go to our other speaker this time and ask them, but why? You know, why should we even take the effort to do good?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm just gonna tell you from the framework of the way I see the world, which is through a sort of an orthodox Christian perspective. And to me, it's because we as humans are the agents of God. We are God's kids. So we do good because that is what the best thing is for the world. That's what the best thing is for us. In other words, if I know that gravity is real, then I can use that for the benefit of mankind instead of going against it. So if I know that there's something that is true out there, I can use that for the benefit of mankind. So I do good for everything, honestly, for all these things, literally for better and worse. I somehow don't believe that doing good is somehow to get to heaven or to have like a floating angel wings. I mean, doing good is Gauss-Bonnet, that theorem. We can hang out afterwards if you guys want to learn more. That's doing good. To do math, to be an engineer, to be an architect, to be a philosopher, to be a parent, to be a good brother, all of these things is to do good because it's a reflection of God's character. And
it's way big fun.
I'm sorry?
It's way big fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you want to respond to that?
I think you just said the same thing I said. I mean, yeah, I'm very similar, right? It's what's best for the earth. It's what's best for. You said that anyway. I think that for whatever reason, I find a lot of personal value and how I identify myself. I'm not going to say that I do good because in my efforts, I come horribly short, from time to time. But the intention is always there.
So what about the consequences? Like, I was just thinking about this whole topic, and I realized that just about 100 years ago, Henry Ford decided that automobiles were going to, make humankind better, and if they could just sell them to every middle-class family, there'd be one in every garage.
The poor misguided soul.
He thought it was doing good.
Yeah.
He had good intentions. So is it just about feeling good, or is it about actually, you talk about doing things that are good for the planet and good for people and all that interconnected messiness? You both talked about messiness, and so I guess I'm curious about consequences. Do you feel good later, even if you have no idea whether the consequences are good?
Oh, that's a great question. I think you get a good feeling from the intention of helping someone. I guess we could do an experiment. We could do a thought experiment, right? You can imagine, working really hard to help somebody with something and it fails. How many people have that experience? Like you get out and you're driving your car miles and miles to help someone change a tire, and you didn't bring the lug iron or whatever, and it didn't work, whatever those things are, right? And at the end of the day, you still have that feeling of having been there with them, as opposed to, now here's the experiment, right? Going totally out of your way to destroy somebody's day, put little spikes in the road, right? And in the end, it doesn't work, so you didn't affect their life. There's a very different feeling there.
I want to disagree a little bit. I think intentions is, to me, because I view something as truth, or there's something bigger than us, I think intentions is a little dangerous. I think if you actually interviewed, people have done actually, interviewed people in the Nazi party and said, were you, as you were carrying out these things, in good intention for the overall sake of mankind? A couple of people will get hurt on the way, but it's the betterment of mankind. And they said, yeah, we did this for the sake of, it wasn't like every person in all of Germany was evil, right? they were manipulated, but they actually thought they were doing good. And
A horrible set of processes.
absolutely true. So I think at that point, their good wasn't done, right? I actually would say good wasn't done, regardless of the intention of that person. So,
But I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
I was only saying that if you get a good feeling when you think you're doing something to help somebody. That was what I thought I was going to say.
I think that answers it. So we're probably about the time when we should open it up to the students, but do you want to keep discussing or?
I think we'll keep doing that when we have questions and stuff.
All right. So for the last part, we're going to have some questions, and they're supposed to have a slide where we can, that's the text message. So feel free to text in your questions, and we'll take a few of those. There's a microphone on the right and a microphone on the left. And a few very small ground rules. Please try to make your question a question and not a lecture. And if you have a quick follow-up, that's fine. But much more than a quick follow-up, and I'm just going to cut you off. That's my job. So maybe we can start on this side.
Oh, I'm not sure. Let's see here. You guys gave a lot of reasons about how you live, and you didn't necessarily really go into why you believe these things. And I know you, a couple of you guys mentioned, or you mentioned that history has proven that that God exists or God has been an influence, and you said that God hung out with Israel. And I would like to know why you truly believe that kind of thing.
Wow. I know, but yeah. So I'm just going to give you 30-second response if I can, and it's going to be superficial because I don't want to take the time. But unlike any book that I know that makes these big claims, unlike the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scriptures, unlike works in the Quran, unlike any other claims, the Old Testament, the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, claims to be historical. In other words, this is not just a set of rules that God has set. This is actually what He did with us. So, in fact, if you look at, this is really silly, but if you look at the Ten Commandments, like, if there's ever, like, the rules from God on a stone tablet, it would be the Ten Commandments, right? And this appears twice in the Bible, and they're both off a little bit from each other. So you would think, like, you're kidding me, right? Like, they couldn't even copy that down straight up. And the point is that there's this concept of history given. There's one time when God actually gives the rules, and Moses is interpreting what that means to his people. So anytime you look at the historical context of these things, I'm not 100% convinced of anything. Right? I'm convinced more than anything that that's true, but I'm not 100% convinced. For example, did Abraham Lincoln die by a gunshot wound? Well, I think so, but there's no 100% evidence. You can't recreate it. It's historical. To me, from history, what has happened, the Babylonian conquest, the Syrian conquest, the rule of David, the archaeological findings we have today, the issues with the life and the death of Jesus makes sense.
I mean, I could talk with you about this for a long time, I guess.
Yeah. But that's my quick 30-second video.
I want to keep responding, but I don't want to take up too much time.
Well, let's actually, we've got a little bit of a line, so we'll take somebody on the other side here.
Hi, I'm Madison, and my question is, you mentioned with the higher power early on, and then when you guys were talking about doing good and like the effect that has on your surroundings, you said that you find that you all have fallen short of doing good or whatever, and I just want to ask, fallen short of what is the standard you set up for yourself?
Oh, great, yeah. I think I've been disappointed in outcomes, and generally it has to do with someone else not being it. That's simple. And yeah.
like to address to the believer, if I could. The first question I have is, I'm guessing through your Indian background, maybe you have some Hindu, maybe it's your great-great-great-grandfather or so forth. So I'm wondering, when did you become an atheist in regard to Ganesh or Shiva and so forth? Yeah. Question number one. Yes. Question number two, in Mark 9:1, Jesus said, before you disciples are going to be dead, I'm going to be returning again. That's a claim that has been historically falsified, and it's in all three synoptic gospels. And also the resurrection of three different synoptic gospels. In one case, the supposed witnesses said there was one angel coming from heaven, and another, there was two. So it's like, couldn't they get that straight? Didn't they realize one angel different from another angel? So it's shocking that all that contradiction could actually be there, and people just sort of overlook it or make up completely phony stories about it.
Yeah. So let me start with the second part, and then I'll go to the first one, and I'll try to be short. But, so the second question was, there are all these contradictions, like in one story in the book of the Gospels, it says there are two angels who were there at Jesus' resurrection, another one there was one, and different witnesses were there. Yeah, so I think to me there are one of two things we can do with it. One is you can say, wow, they can't even get the stories right, they publish this book, they're idiots, throw it all out, right? Option one, which is a very fair option. Or option two is, they're trying to record what historically happened, and they're not trying to fudge with it. So the question is, why did in one story they have one angel, the other one two? Well, one valid way, we all have to write down exactly what happened tonight. I bet we'd get 90% of it right, and 10% of it would be off. So they could say, wait, he was wearing jeans, wasn't he? Wait, no, he was also wearing shorts. I think we'd actually get it off just a little bit. So the fact that they actually have the guts to actually not doctor it and make it the same. If you're going to make up something, you might as well make it right. But they didn't. So to me, that's actually convincing. There's something there.
You find integrity in the book.
I do, and more importantly, I find something fascinating about this is when you read the Old Testament or even the New Testament, it's written by Jews. Even the Old Testament and the New Testament, they're all written by a Jewish audience. They're not writing for 21st century Americans who have enlightened mindsets. You see, when we read the Bible, we say, you know what? This doesn't match this. We're looking at it as a physics and a math book. But it's written as a narrative in that culture. And you read it in a very different set of lenses than you would read today. And so we need to put on those lenses and see how would they have read it at that time. So I think it's a very good thing. The first question that you asked was, when did I become an atheist towards Ganesh and the other Hindu gods? That's a great question. And to me, I think of everything as a nerdy scientist. That's the way I grew up, right? As a mathematician. So when I evaluate a math theorem, Gauss-Bonnet, or any other theorem you guys want to name, pigeonhole principle, and just make it up calculus, you want to test and see if the mathematical theorem is true. Is there evidence for it? And same thing for physics. All of us here are scientists. And I want to use that same kind of thinking to test other things. So when they say Ganesh was here, or Ganesh did these things, I want to test, is there evidence based on these things? Are these philosophical ideas? Do I see those ideas manifested in the world today? And Christianity makes amazing historical claims that Ganesh and the Hinduistic perspective doesn't necessarily that much. So at the end of the day, I have to pick some theory. You could pick an atheistic theory, which is a great theory too. You can say, you know what, nothing makes sense. The fact that there was no God was the greatest thing. To me, the best theory that fits the data that I see in the world today, all the data, not just the scientific data, is the Christian faith.
15 seconds to respond. I think the difference in blue jeans at the scene of a crime versus a brown shirt is a much different thing than one supernatural being or two supernatural beings. You'd think that would be pretty outstanding because not too many people see supernatural beings, and if two of them or one of them appeared all of a sudden, I think you know the difference.
I have a question for both of you. The first, I was raised Catholic, and I'm very, very lucky in that my dad kind of let me choose and let me question my faith. He wasn't very, like, you're Catholic. That's how it is. So I'm not really sure exactly what I believe, but I'm kind of middle of the road. I definitely believe that there's a higher being, and so I have a question for each of you. For Dr. Schwartz, the biggest part of thinking of, or the belief of a higher being for me is you look back and looking into physics and you see Big Bang. Well, what happened before that? And all this crazy things, all the complexity in life, if we started the Big Bang and, set out like a simulation, would we get to where we are? That's a pretty crazy thought for there not to be a God. And I apologize, I really can't pronounce your name. I'm very sorry about that. But another kind of the reason I started questioning was that why can't God have said, oh, here's the Big Bang, boom, go, and he hasn't really meddled with it much. Is there room for science, and I know a lot of people are against evolution, is there room for evolution in God as well? Is there room for scientific theories to say, God made us curious, and he just set out this kind of like puzzle for us to solve, and that's called science?
I don't know what he asked. I think he said, this is a question for you, Joey. I think he said, it would be kind of ridiculous if we had a Big Bang and then had a model to show the evolution of the universe to where we are today. But they're doing that, aren't they?
If I can restate the question is, well, the Big Bang and kind of the model of what's happening is what went on before the Big Bang, what set it all into motion.
Oh, I know.
I apologize.
But I don't know.
I think because, this is just extravagant what we have. We have all these processes in our body and they interact. And that's just a very big thing for me to wrap my mind around. But I think that there's got to be something setting it into motion, and I think it's a God or a higher being. And what are your thoughts on that is really the question.
So let me, just to switch to the second question, which was evolution and creation, and is there room for science in God? Yeah, I'm totally cool with evolution. I mean, it's just, you have to be really careful, again, as you read scripture, right? If you just, I know the previous question over here was about angels, wings, and mark, we don't have to be really subtle. Just open the Bible to the very first part. Genesis 1 has a story of creation. Genesis 2 has another story of creation that's different. I mean, don't look at an obscure text. Just look at the first 2 chapters. Right? Either the whole thing is just crap and throw it out because it's inconsistent. Well, there's something going on here that they're trying to show. I don't think you should take Genesis as a scientific doctrine. Day 1, God did this. I don't buy it. That's not what it was meant to be read as. It's not meant to be read by 21st century enlightened thinkers. It's a Jewish text, but it has truth in it. And the bigger question is, why is Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 different? And what do they tell us? That's a separate question. Thank you.
There are actually a couple of questions here that were texted in, and they both talk about God and Christians, so probably they're for you. The first one is, I would like to know how you justify love and goodness when Christians are responsible for so much evil in the world.
Oh, yeah. That's a great question. That's a very fair question.
Well, you could take out the Christian and put other things in there too.
First of all, there's I want to never have somehow a justification for any atrocity done in the name of Christ, because there's been lots of atrocities done throughout history using the name of Christ. Absolutely true. And we can list the top 5 easily, anybody in this room. So one, that's not the point of the game. 2, just because you, as Jody was saying, is if you replace Christian by anything else, you're still going to get that same game, right? You can say, as atheists, atrocities have been done in different countries, as Buddhists, as Hindus. So if you just look at Hinduism, which is one of the most inclusive religions in the world, you see how much pain there is in India today because of things going on there. So just because somehow Christianity is up there doesn't mean that. That's not a justification for it. But moreover, there's one thing that I find that is redeeming about the Christian faith to me, which is the fact that it, more than anything else, has picked on the people that proclaim Christians falsely. More than anything, the number one people that Jesus slandered and slashed when he had a word against them was not the people who weren't Christians, but who were the ones who were Jewish and claimed to follow God, but twisted it. So to me, that's the most encouraging thing. And again, those kind of questions, when you ask questions about why is it that there's such atrocities, it makes me question my faith, as it should you. I mean, there's no simple, I'm not just willing to check that box and say, that's obvious, right? It's a messy world, and you should take that question really seriously and evaluate it. It's not an easy question.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I as well was kind of overcome by this spectacle of all of the atrocities that have been done, in the name of Christ, or the conquistadores, and then you take a step back, and those were done by human beings against other human beings, and if they didn't have religion, if you took their religion away from them, they would have found a reason to do what they wanted to do. And I think it's really important because, again, it allows us to draw boundaries. When we look at the atrocities caused by Christians or by Nazis or something. Because if we say that these are things that were done by people to other people, we recognize we have the potential ourselves. And I don't ever want to forget that I am the same as those conquistadores who were killing the Mayans, who were the same as me as well.
It reminds me of that song that you were talking about earlier, they'll know us by our love, and then that kind of question comes out and you say, wow, that's not exactly what Christians are supposed to be sounding like, but it happens. Let's take another question.
Hello, I'm Jacob. I have a question for Professor Schwartz. I'm sure you've done a lot of study, a lot of looking into, every area of science. And I guess my question is, what one specific area, if you had to point to one, would be an argument or reasoning for why you think God simply cannot exist? So, I could go on for hours just listing them, but like cosmological argument, etc. Do you have an argument or one main reason?
No, none. in fact, I'd like Satyan. I hear a lot of your arguments. I hear a lot of your statements. Proclaiming how compelling the Christian faith is, and it is, man. To me, it is to me. And if you put a whole bunch of them down and I were to choose, it's pretty good. To make a top 10. I just don't think. I'm sorry to be a geek, right? But in my words, I just find it so highly unlikely. And to me, I just find it unlikely.
So, find it unlikely that God exists, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So, what about, have you heard of William Lane Craig? Renowned Christian apologetic leader. And he goes off a ton of different things, scientific evidence, such as, fine-tuning to take one of them. Things that show that the Earth simply mathematically, you want to talk about hard to believe, mathematically is considered impossible to exist if it all happened by chance. The definition of impossible, mathematically speaking, the world existing surpasses that. And so that's something that's highly unlikely too.
I can take a stab at it in the sense that I'm not convinced by the arguments to be a Christian. I'm not putting my chips in the bucket because somebody's like, well, mathematically the probability that's going to happen is almost nothing. This had to be like this. That's not what convinces me, nor is it what attracts me to it. It's other things. So I'm not saying those arguments are wrong. But to me, they're not sexy.
All right, one more from the text messages. Why does God allow evil in the world? Well, it's got God in it, so I think so. I think Pete wants to talk about why God.
Sure.
I think to me, it just it comes to what love and choice is. So, I have my baby girl that you guys saw a picture of. I have my other kids too.
It's okay.
to me, when I look at her, I would love for her to do what I want her to do. You know, I would love her to watch the right movies, not the princess ones, but these with the Matrix. I would love for her to date the right guys, go to the right school. I'd love for her to do those things. Why? To show me that she loves me. You know, it's like, I as your father have poured my heart into you, I've guided you, and I want you to do these things to show that you listen, that I want the best for you. But if I make her do those things, then that is no longer love. That is no longer choice. In fact, she has no identity. So to me, the reason evil exists is evil is simply, the definition of evil to me is not choosing God. Right? It is a choice that's not God's choice. So evil has to exist for God to say, choose me over something else. And yet, he says to me, at the end, he will address it. He will take care of you.
Yeah. I guess I try to teach my daughter what I understand, and I try to listen to her and learn what she can teach me. Probably goes more the latter. When I think of evil, I mean, I think, like I said, you know, before, like a process that's gone, in my judgment, you know, really wrong. And actually, one of the books I had when she was 8 years old, Lord of Flies, because it was just a process that went really wrong. And I think that informs us a lot more about things like Nazism, things that went really, really wrong, that we can recognize. We have the potential to be in that circle.
Hi, I'm Eric. My question is for Dr. Schwartz. Before I pose my question, I have a quick clarification on something that has been brought up a lot, but I don't think we've ever actually quite nailed down. My question is whether or not you believe in a objective moral good and evil. Okay. In the scope of there being no objective moral evil, the instance you gave us at the very beginning of your dialogue about the 1 to 40 million, the wealth disparity and things like that. My question is, in the absence of there being a moral objective good and evil, why should we care that there is a disparity between wealth and things, and why should we care outside of the context of how we feel about it personally?
I don't know if you should. I guess my question to you is this what you want? And how do you want to deal with it? I mean, it isn't what I want. I don't think, you know, again, I don't think that's a way to optimize happiness, which is a metric that, you know, I can define it. Can I answer your question?
Well, okay, if happiness, like I addressed this earlier, if happiness or sadness is sort of a metric for what's good and what's evil, not in an objective sense, I suppose. You could say that if I, shot my brain full of serotonin or dopamine, I'd be very happy.
Oh yeah, man. I live the mountainside behind my house. Awful.
Are the chemical interactions in our brain that cause emotions equivalent to maybe the happiness you would feel when being altruistic or doing something that you would consider good?
Sure. Like, I think that happiness has to do with some, now, I mean, I don't know it, and I don't think we know it, but there is out there, and they may find that it has to do with some conformation of a protein, it may, it's certainly, the feeling that you feel is going to have some biochemical source to it. And again, I guess that I don't really think much about what you believe, but what is it you'd like to be about it? And the thing we have a lot of control over is what we decide to talk about. And so, if I were to have my way, I would want to talk about this about, I wonder how these different people see it. I wonder what the options are. I wonder what we can do rather than, what is my underlying belief that would bring this to me? Because I know that I have a choice in what I can do, and I know how I feel about that issue.
Hi, how's it going? My question has to do with the inherent good versus evil of a human. Because if we look at it, that much of what religion relies around it is a sort of a base response when it comes, you're talking about biological processes earlier, that, humans try to avoid pain and pain weighs twice as much as good. And we also have in Buddhism, the idea of suffering. So do you think that people are inherently good, or is a lot of this just around in religion, or is God given it to us to have something to guide us to something that's good, or is something that's given to us something that's inherent? Either one. Or both.
I think it's processes, right? First of all, again, in my perspective, you can judge something as good or bad. But what causes a person to go in one direction is, it's a learned thing. And again, if you only live once, you have the option to support processes that you, for whatever reason, think you would like to support.
Do you think there's something inherent, though, in our biology that defines that, or is it just sort of a random assortment?
The latter.
I think to me, I like to use the word bent. In some sense, that's what we all are. We are measuring sticks that are bent. We're not perfect. We're not accurate. We never measure what the right thing is. So there's goodness in us, as you're saying. But at the same time, if you look at who we are as people, you can identify and see that you're capable of that evil. Right? You're capable of being something like that. And I think religion. You can do one of two things. Say, all of religion is this fake attempt. It's not going to reach anything science to solve it. Or you can say, throughout the history of mankind, we've had religion. We try to reach for something bigger than who we are, and that need is fundamentally there to include that in the model of what you can do. And so I take a lot of it.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we're coming up on 9 o'clock, and we're only going to be able to take a couple more questions. However, our speakers are going to stay after a little bit, and I really encourage you to get a hold of them. So let's maybe take 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, this question is for Professor Devadoss. So earlier you mentioned our Western culture's escapism, and you contrasted that with the Eastern move towards a holistic sense of spirituality. So I'm kind of curious of what your opinion is on Generation X's New Age spirituality. So it kind of appears to our age group is kind of rising up in very altruistic and humanistic movements. So I want to know why specifically is the doctrine of Christianity still relevant? Or what sets this particular belief system apart from these current trends in spirituality?
Wow, that's beautiful. Well thought out, very nicely spoken. I think, you know what, no matter how, this is my belief, no matter how far we go into trying to push religion away, the desire for something like this, New Age is a great example, right? The thirst for this culture to say, man, this can't be all it, right? And that's what I think the New Age movement is trying to do. Look at something bigger, something spiritual. That's why we go to football games. I mean, why not just watch it on TV? Why do you have to go to a game with 70,000 people there? Because it's a religious experience. You want to have a concert to have that experience. So I think the thirst for that bigness is in us. And again, to me, the Christian faith is, as Pete and I were talking, it's just one of several things out there. It'll make my top 10 list. Right? The reason it stands out is because of other things than just the claim of satisfying spiritual thirst. And And one thing that stands out is historical claims. To me, as a scientist, I like the fact you can measure it. If somebody comes and says, look, man, King David never existed, it's a bunch of joke. And if you can show that historically, then I think it is a bunch of joke. But I'm convinced that historically it is making sense. So there's other factors other than just that thirst for spiritual fulfillment that leads to that.
One more question?
All right, my comment is directed at the Christian professor. Sorry, I forget your name. Kind of a question, / comment. Don't you think it's, I guess, suspicious, or I just find it interesting that as we do progress in technology or kind of get away from religion, that it's specifically Christianity and the Bible, where it used to be like the Bible was infallible, it's God's word, God said it, so like you couldn't mess it up. But I feel like Christians have been retreating and saying, okay, well, maybe Genesis isn't all true. It wasn't in one day, because science disproves that. And, oh, maybe we should forget about the mass genocides that God commanded, or, oh, it's okay to be gay. I mean, there's just like so many issues that I feel Christianity is constantly retreating on. And doesn't, I guess it's just more of like, don't you think this is a little suspicious, or a little, what do you say about that?
You want to scientifically extrapolate? Is that what you're thinking?
Sure. I love that word, extrapolate.
Question, right? You're just saying, feels like you keep reneging on all the claims you're making, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually you got nothing. You do like one or two things, and maybe that'll go away. I think the core of the Christian faith has never changed in terms of what we call Orthodox Christian faith. That God did create the world, He sustains it. Every second of this world exists because of God. So to me, like, the point of creation, like, was it this one event in 7 days? People can take very different views on that thing. I'm not really interested in those things. The things about the genocide that happens, I would never renege on that, because that is a historical claim that it's making, right? So then the question is, what's going on? Like, how could the God of justice say slaughter these people? Right? That's a whole, and I'm not backing out on that. I am backing out on Genesis 1 being a literal text. And I think any Jewish scholar, if you have read sort of any Jewish criticism, text criticism in the past 2,000 years, you realize they are not taking Genesis 1 literally. Very few people ever have. Maybe there's a group of people who would say, the Bible says it, I believe it, and that's it, right? And the Bible is a bunch of documents written by a bunch of people over a whole time period, put together, saying this is how God interacted with man. It is messy. And I think we have to take it as a messy thing.
But the core that you consider unique to Christianity, I think, is Jesus coming and dying for our sins, right?
No. Okay. I think the core is this entire story of God's plan with mankind and how He will redeem and address the earth itself, the brokenness of it and the beauty of it. And it culminated, it climaxed at the point of Jesus on the cross.
But don't you think it's also suspicious that this is also, I guess I view it more as being rehashed as, like Greek mythology has tons of stories of, gods dying for humanity. I feel like, again, it's more of it can be a retelling, or you could say that it's not really unique, the core Christianity, that this is, as he was saying, the rest of that, these human values and stories were there in place before Jesus ever came.
But if you look at, I'll just answer this question stuff, but if you look at Greek mythology, they will never say, yeah, Zeus was there. He was there like 400 years ago and he was hanging out, right? Whereas the Christian faith would say, yeah, there was a person like this, and there was Pontius Pilate, and there was Rome, and these things happened. So it's a bold statement compared to a theological claim.
Well, this sounds like a wonderful discussion to keep on having in just a few minutes. I would like to give each of our speakers just 30 seconds to kind of wrap up and tell students what you think that you want them thinking about as they head home. You want to
start? 30 seconds. So there's a story that I think I found pretty interesting. It's a story of Karl Barth. He's a famous theologian, probably one of the greatest theologians who ever lived. And this physicist, actually this astronomer, finds him after church and he asks him, and he says, Professor Barth, isn't it true that all of religious talk, all these religions are basically saying the same thing? And Karl Barth, who has spent his entire lifetime as one of the greatest theologians, looks at him and is like, are you serious? He goes, yeah, there's just a simple phrase you can summarize all of religion by. What is this phrase, my friend? He goes, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Isn't that just basically what the point of religion is? And Karl Barth thought about this, and he turned to this astronomer and he said, well, isn't it true that there's a phrase that can summarize all of astronomy also? The guy's like, what? What phrase is that that can summarize the Big Bang and the supernova and the black hole and multiverse theories? What phrase is this? And Bart says, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. And the point is, we can trivialize these deep issues with science, but there are big things going on behind the scenes, and I encourage you to look at them.
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.